This is Meet the Author, and I'm your host, Tigner Rand. Meet the Author is part of Rolling Out's book club series where I talk with authors about their new books, projects, and of course, what inspires them to write. Today, joining me is Chloe Dulce Louvourezo. Chloe is a storyteller who loves to encourage unrepresented women, creativity, and sense of belonging. Through her podcast, Life, I Swear, Chloe started telling stories of womanhood and motherhood, all while unpacking and celebrating all the nuances what make women who they are. Beautiful, messy, but always human. Mm-hmm. From the podcast, Chloe decided to write a book, Life, I Swear, which is intimate stories from Black women on identity, healing, and self-trust. This beautiful and colorful book is chock filled with essays from 20 influential Black women who put down their shields of superpowers and begin to tell their private journeys of living through pain and joy with raw honesty and unapologetic self-love. Without further ado, I'd like to bring to the show today, Miss Chloe Louvouezo. How are you doing today?
I am so good. Thank you for having me today. And what a beautiful introduction.
I'm glad to have you. Just for those who are not aware, this is a new book. And if you can show the book for us,
Absolutely.
Chloe, Life, I Swear. It is now available on blackbookstore.com. Be sure to go and check it out. It is a great book. It's a book that really talks about the things that women go through. And it identifies with women, but it also parallels with things that men go through too, but a lot of times they're afraid to talk about it. Mm-hmm. So I guess the first question I have to ask you, Chloe, why is it so important for readers to have their stories told like you told it through Life, I Swear?
Man, I think it is so important, especially for people of color and Black people who navigate the world, a world that is often not built and doesn't receive their voices, doesn't allow them to tell their own stories, but our stories are told on our behalf unfairly often and inaccurately often. And so, when we talk about representation matters, it matters because particularly when we're talking about topics that are very vulnerable and very personal, topics that we often keep to ourselves. When we keep them to ourselves, sometimes we think we're, the only one going through it, or we normalize toxic narratives that we tell ourselves or that we receive, and we're not able to really process them out loud. And so for me, having this collective of 25 stories put together, it allows the reader, presumably the reader of color, to feel understood, to feel seen, to feel like they have community even when they're not in the same physical space, but this communal understanding of each other based on our very shared experiences. But then also, this book for me is an opportunity to give space to our nuances as Black women as well, which I think is very important. Sometimes we can feel trapped within this very monolithic definition or perception of being Black, being woman, and definitely at the intersection of both of those.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. Now, you started out the book kind of telling your own story, and it's like you kind of just took off the whole veil and said, hey, this is it. This is Chloe. This is what I had to deal with. And, even trying to find yourself through going back and forth through America, through Africa. So kind of tell people a little bit about your story and what inspired you to write Life, I Swear.
Thank you for that question. And often I feel like a lot of women, especially starting off as little girls, they're not given the mic. They're not asked to be the main characters, the lead characters of their own stories. And so this book was an opportunity to allow that for myself and for other women who are often silenced or feel that they have to really go through some of these rough experiences in silo. About myself, I feel that I am a cat or woman of nine lives. If you've gotten through, the first couple of my own essays, which I weave through the book, it is a very unique upbringing that I've had. I am half African, half American. My father is Congolese from the Republic of Congo. My mother is white American from Northern California. I grew up in Niger, West Africa. And so being between countries and cities, I moved around a lot. Um, my mother wasn't always in a position to be my primary caretaker. Just her work took her to places that didn't offer education. Um, and so for me, I lived between not just countries and cities, but also many homes. Um, I can name at least six families I lived with growing up. And for me, the the beauty of having a diverse collection of essays from Black women is really showing that our experiences are very nuanced, and context around how we define Blackness can be very different from culture to culture. And that was one of my biggest lessons growing up. And so I lived in West Africa for the first half of my life. I came to the US when I was 14. And, you know, race and is looked at very differently, also under this umbrella of colonialism, but very differently. And so in the US, wherever we go, the universal experiences, I'm a Black woman first at the first impression of me. And so having to acclimate to race in a different way in the US was a journey. And that led me to Howard, that led me into career. And I think what makes the book timely as it relates to career and the pandemic and staying home, we're able to take back some of those labels um, or those presumptions about who we are as soon as we enter into a conference room or boardroom. And now that we're home, we're able to rethink our identity, um, how we frame the notion of home and community, and instead reinvest into ourselves, so that we can feel fuller, but then also have more autonomy as we go back into the world.
Right. So how was it? I mean, you mentioned that you lived in other homes and other families, kind of the surrogate family.
Mhm.
How was that for actually that would have been before you were a teenager, so that was more of your adolescent years.
That was in middle school and high school.
Okay.
Yeah. And I will say those families were all diverse. I lived with a Liberian family, a Canadian family. Um, I lived with a Native American family and a Black
Mm.
American family.
Oh
I
wow.
and I went to boarding school for 2 years with nearly all Asian and white students. And so I feel like I've experienced identity in the sense of belonging or not from very different lenses. And it's just been interesting to be a student of how others um, have formulate their worldviews based on
Mhm.
race differently.
Okay. So with the lens of as a teenager or a high school student, how did you feel? I know now as an adult, you see it from a different lens now. You probably can see, hey, okay, that was a value. I learned something from that. But being that young sister,
Hmm.
how did you really feel?
Mm. I would say, and I was just talking about this yesterday, my upbringing was very rich. I've
Mhm.
had experiences, just living in Niger that were priceless and cannot be replicated anywhere else. But also, I would say that was um, a lonely experience because starting at 10 years old, I started living with other families until senior year. And so, really hopping and around from different uh, family homes and environments and cities. Um, the positive is that it helped me hone this skill of assimilating and being agile and being adaptable. Um, and that is a strength. But there are consequences to not having a real feeling of foundation or feeling of being from everywhere but nowhere at the same time. And so, you know, I do think that that had implications on my sense of self as a young girl, which translated to, you know, developing certain attachments to either people or accomplishments or expectations that would have otherwise defined who I am or my value. And then that, you know, leading into young adulthood, I really had to work on challenging
Okay,
that.
I can imagine. So I guess fortunate, you know, what a blessing to be able to, you know, have that life, you know, but then to experience, but then come out unscathed in a way that you
Yeah.
can say, I learned and I grew from this, you know,
Hmm.
which is that's really, really powerful. And you kind of alluded to it. You said you kind of brought out some of your strengths. And it leads me to this question. We have some questions that we call sisters with superpowers.
Hmm.
So what would you say uh would you consider your superpower?
Yeah, I would consider my superpower, and I think this is kind of a twist on probably superpower, but I would consider my superpower to be able to relate to a lot of people, and the that being empathy. You know, seeing
Mhm.
myself in other people's stories. There are a few things um, that I don't deeply feel.
Okay.
And so, you know, you tell me a story of trials and tribulations, and I bet I can relate. If you tell me a story of feeling like an outlier, I bet I can relate. And so I
Mhm.
think for me, that's been beautiful because in the midst of not feeling um, like I really belonged in any particular space, I feel like I've made space for other people to feel like they belong in the spaces that I create, which I think the book is a manifestation of that.
Yeah, and I can see that. I can
Mhm.
definitely see that, and that kind of goes down the path of there is no testimony without a test.
Mhm.
So your life from we'll say from the existence of what you can remember up until that aha moment, that was pretty much the test. So now,
For
as you just
sure.
stated, it becomes more of the testimony because now you're able
Mm.
to relate and talk with sisters and possibly even
Mhm.
brothers about things that you can say that I experienced this, so I can tell you
Mhm.
exactly how I dealt with it.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. You know, when you're like in the middle of a situation and experience, it can feel so daunting or
Mhm.
so isolating, the end of the world.
Right.
On the other side, you know, it's you're able to have a bird's eye view of all the experiences, and I think Life I Swear, just the title in of itself captures that feeling after you go through the thing. It's like life, I swear.
Where so how
I
did
thought
you
it, yeah.
so now you have a podcast, but then this is
Hmm.
also kind of the part two of
Hmm.
the podcast. So how did you come up with that? I mean, I heard what you just said about, you know, life, I swear. How did it, how did that just manifest? What's the backstory behind the title?
Yeah, I mean, it was a long, lot of long, lot of long nights with my roommate in New York in my mid 20s. You know, we were at that place in our lives between ambiguity and like really strong desires for what we wanted our lives to be or the woman we wanted to become. And so we would have these long nights that were a mix of, you know, debriefs on the sermons, you know, we just listened to that Sunday, um, crying over what did or did not work out, feeling uncomfortable with the things um, that weren't clear, where we lacked clarity, um, feeling tameless and wanting to take over the world, but also feeling deeply insecure about where we were in life. And so we would end every night with life, man. I swear, and that is really captures the heartbreaks, the breakthroughs, the irony of life, the coincidences and consequences. And it's really a sigh. It's like sometimes it feels overwhelming. Sometimes it feels, um, look at God and
Yes.
her sense of humor. Sometimes, it can mean so many things, but it's all about being on this journey of life. And let's see what else it hits us with.
Yeah. Now, after writing and curating this book, what did you learn about yourself?
Mm. The writing process, I think the essays in this book that I wrote personally are a look back and a reflection on my past. But the writing and the editing of this book are probably equally as significant to my personal journey. When I first wrote the first draft, um, it was a moment in time. Those few months, it captured those few months of writing captured how I felt in that moment of time. And then 8 months passed by and it was time to edit my essays. And I'm
Mm,
like, I have grown so much since 8 months ago. And I did a whole lot of re-editing of my essays because I returned to the drafts with more clarity, more confidence, more resolve around many of the things that I had written about, that I had grappled with for a lot of my life. And so I think the thing I've learned is really, one, it scared me to put this in the book because I'm like, what if I grow even more? And then this is going to cement um, my perspective at one point in my life. Of course, I will continue to evolve. And 10 years from now, I'm going to have a different perspective. And this book might not reflect who I am in that future self, right? So I think it's a lot about allowing for reinvention and allowing something that will live on the shelves of people's homes and bookstores uh, for a while. Don't know about forever. Hopefully they
right.
keep it. But it is allowing that to not be the sum of everything that I am, but just to be um, a snapshot of who I am
Yes.
at this time. And then as a writer, it's someone who leans into words over time, giving myself permission to articulate my reinvention in a new way in years to come. And just giving permission. And um, this is just part of my creativity and my artistry for right now. And then hopefully, as you know, anyone who follows my writing can follow me in my journey of learning the world and how I fit into it.
Right. You said the word permission. Why is it so important for people, us human beings, women, men, to allow ourselves permission to be authentic to ourselves? Because so often we don't do that. We stay, whatever happened in the past, we tend to kind of linger and dwell on it, no matter how small or large it is. So what do you tell that person, that sister, who's dealt with something, how to give themselves permission to love themselves or to evolve into
Hmm.
being not Chloe, but like how you just described how you saw yourself evolving.
Yeah, I think it is so important when we talk about, um, you know, how I talk about feeling completely liberated. It's giving myself permission to feel deeply. It's giving myself permission to change my mind. It's giving myself permission um, to have the audacity to dream big. And I think the more that we don't give ourselves permission, we are literally entrapping ourselves
Yes.
in in within the bounds, the confines of what the world um, expects of us or oppresses us into, right?
Yes.
And so for me, liberation is like not attaching our the narratives that we speak into ourselves, or um, not attaching ourselves to the expectation the world, um, whiteness has of us, and really allowing ourselves to define our dreams, define our identity, define our value, on our own terms. I think it's really easier said than done because
Yes.
we are, it's been from a generational perspective, we have spent generations really um, under the veil of uh, a society that doesn't work in our best interests. On an
Yes.
individual level, we have childhood traumas or childhood narratives that we've grown up as adults to believing those to be the truth. And so to dismantle what we've always associated with the truth about how much we belong or how much we deserve permission, um, the longer into adulthood, the harder it is to
Yes.
really break free from that.
So
Um,
true. So
and
true.
at 36 years old, I can attest to that. And so for me, the process of writing was really about putting who I was on paper, allowing myself to like literally file it away, archive it, lay it to rest so that I can now move on to a blank slate and literally rewrite the story I want to see in the future, but also more importantly, rewrite the narratives I'm telling myself. Um, if a particular thing happened that felt devastating and soul crushing, let me rewrite that story so that it's speaking power into me.
Yes.
Because there's two versions of every story, even the ones that we hold, and so it's about, let me look at this from a different lens. Let me ask the tough questions and examine my own patterns and behaviors so that I can be more responsible with the story that I am feeding back into myself. And I think that's the permission to rewrite our story so that we can really like breathe that into new life.
Yes. The power of the tongue is
Yes.
heavy.
Yes.
Uh, we can say a lot of things to ourselves that will hinder us from going to the next level. And no matter how spiritual we may be, how much encouragement your family, friends, or loved ones give us, if we speak that negativity into our
Mm-hmm.
spirit, it can outweigh all the greatness that mother, father, sister, brother, whoever,
Mm-hmm.
mentor,
Right.
and as you say, it takes time for us. And the longer
Yeah.
it lingers in your spirit and into adulthood, the harder it is
Mm-hmm.
to break away, to break those chains.
Absolutely. Because we go through I mean, we're going through cycles. We're frustrated why the same thing keeps happening.
Yes.
And sometimes, toxicity can live in a relationship. You break up with
Yes.
that person or separate yourself. Then it manifests in your career
Yes.
relationships. Then like we have to break the cycles. Some that we have the power, the immediate power to do just by the power of choice and the power of decision making, and some require a deeper level of healing. But it's so important to break those cycles.
What are three things, if you've told people in the past, men or women, how to break those cycles, so of the past, so they can move forward? Anything come to mind?
Mm. Ooh. Um, you know, I'm always cautious of giving life advice because
Understand?
um, also, this idea that there is context to everything. Someone could ask for relationship advice, and I'm like, I don't know what happens behind
Right.
those doors. But I do think that generally it's important for um, one is stillness,
Mm.
being still. And so often we can um, be susceptible to distraction. And sometimes that is, media, social media, just all these things that are flashing. And it's really hard to compartmentalize our time versus, um, you know, the noise. And then sometimes I think we allow distractions in our lives and noise in our lives because it's easier to navigate those than it is to be still and alone and quiet in our own thoughts.
Yes.
And the distraction can be an avoidance. It can be escapism. And so I think stillness is something that I always that I've just become a fan of. You know, what did they? There is this saying of it's escaping me, but the ministry of rest is something that I've been in practice and in conversation around. It's allowing your mind to rest so that you can really take inventory of the things that are entering into your ecosystem that you're
Yes.
trying to create.
Yes.
And without the rest, everything's coming in, coming out. It's just a free for all. And so I just encourage people to move a little bit slower, so that they're more cognizant of what's coming in and coming out, our input versus our output.
Mm.
And another thing I always encourage is just time. And I say that because prior to the pandemic year and a half, I took a sabbatical from work for a year.
Okay.
And that was a mental health break. It was a personal healing break. And I had gone through a lot prior to taking this year. Um, and you know, time is something I think we take for granted, but if we allow things um, to play their course, you know, someone was just telling me the other day, um, whatever happens most organically is the best way. And I said, but organic often takes more time, and that is okay. And I think there's also always, you know, there's a lot of impatience around healing. When am I going to get over it? When is
Yes.
it? I just want to put it behind us. I just want to move on. And whether it's in grief or in heartbreak or in anything, it doesn't work like that.
Exactly.
It does not work like that. Time is, there are things you have to do in that time, but also just allowing time to run its course, settle your emotions. And when we act on instinct, when our emotions are high, oftentimes that's when we do get into those cycles that we are trying to break from.
Exactly.
And so it's really maturing our patience in how we're handling ourselves more delicately.
Yeah. Well said. I like exactly what you said. You touched on a lot of key points. And if as simple as your answer was, if people will stop and think about it, the body needs rest. The body is like a computer. If you
Hmm.
overload the computer, your computer starts to run slow.
Hmm. Yes.
It
Not
bogs down.
responsive.
It's not responsive. Likewise, the mind is the same way. If it's inundated with so much information, be it white noise of our past issues, makes us sluggish. Just by going to sleep, sometimes it's enough to rejuvenate the mind and the body
Right.
to wake up fresh, like a reboot on a computer.
Hmm.
Sometimes if you don't turn your computer off and you wake up, over a couple of days or a week, it runs slow until you turn it off. It has to go through that process to clean itself up.
Well said.
Same thing, which is where we are, and people don't really realize that. And the same thing, would you say, with patience is no different than planting a tree, an apple
Mm.
tree. You're not
Hmm.
going to get an apple in one day,
It won't
one
bear
week.
fruit that way.
It will not bear fruit. And you have to be patient. And unfortunately, we're in a society now that we're lack of patience.
Right.
We want
Instant
the
gratification.
instant gratification. Exactly.
Yeah.
We want it right now, be it our love life, our finances, our
Yeah.
job, whatever it is. And if it doesn't happen, then we want to blame someone, except for
Hmm.
just taking a look at the man in the mirror or the woman in the mirror and say, hey,
Hmm.
look, I control my destiny.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely.
You know, um, this is a good book. How did you go about selecting the sisters for the essays? Because these were all phenomenal women. These are all women who were phenomenal in their own way as I read each one of the essays. But then it was that one theme that seemed to be a continuous thread throughout the entire, for each one.
Mm.
There was something that made them reflect back to their past, whatever it was, be it a relationship or identity or self-love, but yet they had greatness in them all along, but then,
Mhm.
so what made you, how did you select these sisters to be a part? And if you can kind of name some of the ones that you stand out as
Yeah.
being.
Yeah. So there are some women who I have known for years, who are deep friends. And I'll start with Elaine Welteroth because she wrote an essay and the foreword. Um, I'll also, one of my dearest friends, Brooke Hall, she talks about sisterhood. Um, there's a woman in here, Didine Umunyana, who
Yes.
is from Rwanda. She's a genocide survivor and advocate. And there are other women who I've met in my own healing journey who have deeply inspired me. Some names are Dion Ivory. She leads an organization called The Body, A Home for Love. She's a phenomenal creative director. Alex L. She's known for her breath work and healing work and her poetry and writing. Um, there are women across many industries. I'd say a lot of them are creatives because I think there's a certain love for our expression that creatives have, expression of matters of the heart in particular. But all of these women are reflective across the Black diaspora. Diversity within Blackness is very important to me based on my own experience. But all kind of overlap in terms of their past experiences with experiences of my own, which
Mm-hmm.
helped me kind of organize the book into themes that resonated with me. And when I say this book was therapeutic for me first, that was the intention for even writing my own stories. And as I was doing that, I was like, this is too good. Let me bring other women into this project because our collective healing is so important.
It's
Our
important. Yeah.
individual healing journeys are important to bring to the work because if we bring ourselves to the work, the collective work, whether it's in creativity or entrepreneurship, whatever it is, and we bring ourselves still in these wounded places, operating from those narratives we spoke of um, that don't lift us up, but they are operating from a place of competition or cynicism.
Mm.
All of these things that are really impacted by the world outside of us, whether it's noise or, uh, you know, the systems, uh,
Yes.
then, we're not really nurturing our collective work. And our impact is more in numbers than it is in, the soul work. And so for me, the collective work is also just as important. And so those women kind of are reflective of people who are committed to their individual work that they can then bring to the collective.
Wow. The breakdown, you mentioned that the book is put into themes. What are those themes, and why did you select these themes as part of as the blueprint?
Yeah. So the three themes are the book is has three parts. The first is sum of my parts, SUM, and that really speaks to our identities um, from a holistic perspective. Our identities, who we are, our sense of self is not just based on one element of who we are. And the monolithic perception of Black women slaps a label or one expectation or persona on them. And so, being the sum of our parts, I am from, I'm from my father's uh, steam in his kitchen. I am from my mother's wandering heart. I am from the girlfriends who raised me. I am from this place or that place. I am from my memories, my experiences. I am the sum These are the sum of my parts that make up who I am and how I show up. And
That was,
so,
that's a poem. That was a poem that you just said. That is a poem.
oh, thank you. But that essay is really around identity and how we can think of it in so many different ways. Um, and so part two is called Bear Witness. And that's really um, a collection of essays on, those things that would have otherwise pulled us down. It's really a collection of essays on resilience, and what I like to call post-traumatic growth, how we have really grown. To your point, all of these women have stories from the past that they're bringing into um, the future in reflection and in um, really solace with themselves. And so it's looking at what would have otherwise been perceived as traumatic and heavy, and are traumatic and heavy, whether it's grief or abuse, but looking at it from a very tender lens.
Yes.
Um, and then the third part is called Piece It Together, PEACE. Um, and that's really about living with intention. And so taking all that I've been through, how I see myself, how I've had to fight, whether it's stereotypes or bias, how I've had to persevere in times of uncertainty or trauma, and how am I showing up and deciding to show up today? How am I giving myself permission to reinvent myself? How am I giving myself grace? How am I coming home to myself? And
Mm.
so that's where I hope, as people journey through the book, that third part is really going to allow them to really sink into who am I today, and let me not nitpick all the things I am resentful of in my life, or what went wrong or what I don't have enough of, but let me sink into gratitude, starting with
Mm.
myself first.
Okay. What thoughtful, encouraging piece of advice would you give your younger self?
Mm. Uh, Trust should be earned in droplets and lost in buckets.
Ooh, wow.
Yes.
Repeat that one
And
more time. Say that
I
again.
said, I said, trust should be earned in droplets and lost in buckets.
Wow, that's heavy.
And I did not know that. Me wanting to feel loved, feel, um, feel at home in someone, or uh, I think for me, um, I've let people in too quickly without asking
Mm.
the questions that the foundation of love deserves. And I think there is a balance that we have to have, that I think we only know how to have with life experience and wisdom, in terms of where, how tall, and when to have our guards up.
Hmm.
And we have to kind of get hurt a couple times to be like, okay,
Yes.
this wall is gonna be built here versus here, or this high versus this high, and with whom deserves the gates to be opened for, right? And
Yes.
so for me, it's, the discernment to be able to make judgments, or make a judgment call as to when and how tall and for whom those walls should be, is something I really had to learn. Uh, I'd say the hard way up
Yeah.
through adulthood.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would wish for my younger self.
Yeah. As my mother used to always say, experience is always the best teacher.
Hmm.
Uh, but the beautiful thing about the experience and it being a lesson taught is not for us to dwell on it. And that's where so many people, as we have talked throughout this whole conversation, sometimes people get lost in the past,
Hmm.
and you can't flourish, you can't grow because
Hmm.
you're still stuck 15, 20 years ago.
Right. And then at a certain point, though, And I can say this for myself, you just get sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yes.
And then that's,
Y-
and then that's when you're just like, okay, I'm not giving myself any other option except to glow up in, so that I am really seeing myself in the way that God sees me. Why would I deserve anything less? But I think it takes being over. I'm just tired of these cycles, and so I'm gonna make a decision to choose differently.
Right. Was there any moment in time or life to where you did have that aha moment? Say, okay, I'm sick and tired of this, and you knew this. That was kind of the evolving moment for you that you really saw yourself shift from the old Chloe to now taking a new path and a new journey.
Yeah. And I do detail this a bit in my book too, but um, there was um, there was a time when I was married, and there was a time where I was pregnant with my second son, and the marriage ended, and then I lost that pregnancy,
Mm.
and that was 7 months pregnant, and so it's um, when you are really grooming your life and designing your life um, with the expectation of a plan or a vision for the future, and then those things um, sort of abruptly end, and it can feel like you
The end
don't
of the
know.
world. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so um, I realized that my relationship with motherhood shifted a little bit. Um, my relationship with the idea of relationships even shifted a little bit.
Mm.
I had a really good conversation in that season um, with a woman who was divorced and was like, "Why do you want to? Why do people want to get married?"
Oh, so
And
you went all the way down that rabbit trail. You was
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, and yeah, I did, and I had to ask that question
Hard
of
question.
myself too.
Mhm.
And part of it is it's the right thing to do, so society says,
Right.
or you realize when you ask yourself really questions and then you answer with really raw honesty, you're like, I wasn't doing that for the right
Attention.
intention. Not to say marriage is off the table, but next time I do it, it has to be for the right intention.
Makes
And
sense.
so for me, that experience of both of those happening within a very short time period, um, I think sometimes the way I've learned best is when it rains, it pours, it floods,
Mhm.
and then I'm like, okay, we have to gut the house, And so um, it was definitely a trying season, but I think from that I forced myself into stillness, and from that I gave myself time, and all of those things really were not in vain. I believe really in looking back because they allowed me to kind of flip the flip the roles in terms of I was trying to be everything to everyone, and I hadn't spent not one season of my life putting myself in the center of my stories. I was always, even within my stories, I was a supporting I was in a supporting role. When I think we all deserve, especially people of color and women, we all deserve to first see ourselves as the lead characters in our stories, um, and then allow
Yeah.
them to evolve.
Yeah. I don't know how deep your faith is, but this one passage in the Bible that I always think about is all things work together for the good for those who love God. And
Hmm.
even though I cannot, there are no words that I can say that can express feel that void that you felt at that time. But in hindsight, now you can say, hey, okay, this was a learning moment for me.
Hmm.
And here you are now so many years later, and you're now writing, you have written a book and you're telling your story, and you have now found other sisters who be able to tell their story, opposed to still being in the corner, being bitter and angry, to the world. And that says a lot.
Mhm.
Every person, man or woman, it's hard to get to that point, but
Yeah.
that was a great journey. You climbed a high mountain to get
Mhm.
there. To lose a child, no one knows the pain that is except for the mother.
Mhm.
And, I can't even put words to that. But here you are now able to talk about it, with
Yeah.
some form of peace, and you've
Mhm.
actually written about it too. So I commend you,
Mm.
and hopefully that from this book there will be other sisters and possibly even men who can learn something from it, just to being able to relate and cope with women, because we have a problem with that. Men have a big problem of being able to, oh, women are too emotional. And by nature, yes, women are emotional, but then at the same time, they're still human.
Mhm.
And I could relate to, for every essay I read, I can relate to.
Mm. That's
I
great.
can empathize with this sister for what she went through. And everybody can't do that. And the average
Yeah.
man is always want to be macho. And, you can be stronger than that. But no, but when God made us, he made us, pretty much the same. Men have emotions too, though we try to
Mhm.
conceal that all the time, but it's there,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know.
it is there, and I do think, um, you know, going back to your question of what's your superpower, and I said empathy. I
Yes,
don't, I mean, I do believe that's something that can be exercised as well.
of course.
And it takes understanding another person's journey to, you have to get there before you have the ability to empathize with them. And so for me, more transparency of these tough
Mhm.
experiences is important, because more transparency leads to more understanding and more empathy and
Yes.
deeper connections, even between women and women, but also men and women. So to your point, I believe this book can be for everybody.
Yes. I know that there is you have a favorite parts of the book. Would you mind reading one of your favorite passages from the book?
Um, sure. I think I'll read part of the intro. I have an intro letter in the book, um,
Yes.
and I think that might help set the tone and introduce introduce the premise of it. And so I'll
Okay.
read a passage from that. I love stories. I love the texture and the nuances of them. I love understanding our whys of everything. Why do we feel the way we feel, and what makes us do the things we do? For Black women, being in community as we unpack and make sense of our whys and our lives is an outlet that nothing else in the world can provide. Our sharing of uncertainties, vulnerabilities, and trepidations about life makes space for a special intimacy, an intimacy we are rarely afforded because the world expects the strength of Black women to be demonstrated through restraint of our true selves. Challenging seasons of life remind us how much intimacy and feeling understood are gateways to personal healing. After a trying year in 2019, I started to document conversations with other Black women about personal stories that have enlightened us to answer some of those questions, as deep dive dialogues in my Life I Swear podcast and as stories in this book. I've always considered myself a cat of 9 lives, rebirthed in each new season, one that emerges from fires at times scarred but layered in stories that tell the truth of the tale of the dance of this life. It's been an incredible one. I've lived in 11 cities, 5 countries, and traveled the world. I've been in abusive and loving relationships, home birthed a prince of a son, grew a family, been a single mother, raised by a single mother. I've taken risks, led a spontaneous life, explored artistry, and ebbed and flowed through loss and glory. Tell me something you've been through, and I bet I can relate. Give me a story of promise and hope and faith, and you're speaking to my spirit. Give me a story of pain and struggle, and know in my eyes that I deeply understand. I've spent years trying to find the words to articulate the breadth of what this journey of life has meant to me. Putting pen to paper through stories of loss and love, discovery and rebounds is the only way I know how. The pages that follow are an anthology of stories from Black women about the falling down, the cycles, the post-traumatic growth, and the resilience. In curating these stories, I've had the blessed opportunity to speak to other women of the Black diaspora from around the country and the world, all who have shared from a place of vulnerability and truth. Their stories capture a range of experiences and reflections that offer nuance and variation of our human nature to discover new facets of ourselves. They represent voices and sentiments of our time, chronicled for collective healing.
That right there, their introduction really set the tone for the entire book.
Mm-hmm.
So for ladies and gentlemen, for those who purchase this book, and when you read it, that alone lays out the foundation of what to expect from each sister who wrote an essay in Life, I Swear. One last question I'd like to ask you. If you could thank any Black woman for her contributions to history or society, who would that be and why?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, that's so hard. There's too
first,
many.
first one that comes to mind.
Yeah, no, the first that comes to mind, the first that came to mind was Oprah.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why, but I also need to
Go ahead.
just name the others, just as homage.
Sure.
The others that came to mind were, of course, Maya Angelou, Audre Lorde, and Cicely Tyson.
Okay.
The reason Oprah came to mind for me is that Oprah, out loud, is still a student of spirituality.
Yes.
She doesn't claim to, well, though she does have the one thing I know for sure, she does do that.
Yes.
She has that book, but she is still a student, and she is always absorbing and learning. And if there's anything that I've learned from the podcast and people who are able to receive the podcast and allow it to aid them in their own healing journey, it's that at any given point, you can help someone heal while still learning to heal for your own self. And you can not have everything figured out and still help other people figure their own lives out. And so I don't think we need to ever have achieved perfectionism or reach the point where we've definitively become the person we want to be, the woman I want to be, before I can feel qualified to also help other people along their journey. And so for that reason, I have really admired just the transparency that Oprah has had in still learning along the way, while still, bringing other people and shepherding other people into this parallel journey. And so I think that she's just done a phenomenal job of doing that in her career, and allowed that to really be, she's grown as she's helped other people grow. And I think that is the most humanizing element of her work. So
yeah, a good choice, and a good way of how you depicted Oprah. I think she has been very transparent over all the years that she's been in media. She's told her story, her backstory. A lot of times people like to hide or conceal those bad things that happen in your life. But sometimes those things become the stepping stones to helping someone else. And I think Oprah did a great job, and she's always giving. I mean, I think that's important too. When you give, whatever the give is, it's not always giving. You got a car, but she gives from her heart, nuggets of knowledge, which sometimes are important.
And I do think that when we think of giving too, and I am totally girl crushing on Oprah right now, but it's also the gift of recognizing and celebrating that there's dignity in everyone's story.
Yes.
And as a storyteller herself, finding dignity in the story of of the regular American or the characters that she portrays, that would often might be dismissed or disregarded by society. And so
Mm.
I think that dignity is just the human thread that we all need these days.
That's a great point. That's well taken, because every character she's played that I can recall, she's played, we'll say, somewhat of the underdog, the one,
Hmm.
but she brought life and
Hmm.
brought it to life to a point that people could relate to those characters.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a good point. And for a person who was really, quote, not an actor, she did a great job, telling those stories. And
Hmm.
have you ever met
Absolutely.
Oprah?
No. If you want to do an intro, please, I'm
Let's
available.
I wish I knew her. I can't even. We're going to claim it today that's going to be something that's going to happen soon for Chloe. You will meet Oprah and have a conversation with her. It won't be just in passing, but it will be opportunity for girl talk, to a point that you can sit down and have healthy conversation,
Yeah.
and maybe even get a chance for her to read the book, and you all have a
Hey,
conversation about that. We're going to claim that today.
claim it.
Right. We
I love
claim
it.
it.
Yeah.
What surprised you most about this book?
Surprised me most? I mean, it's been incredibly well received by all of the I think I was initially surprised when I was like, I have an idea. I'm gonna reach out to a bunch of women, some which I know, some I don't, and every single person, yes, count me
Oh,
in,
wow.
done.
That's good.
And I think what surprised me is that people trusted me so much, not just with telling me their story, but entrusted me with sharing some of their stories who they hadn't um, written about yet, or sometimes in some instances processed yet, but they trusted me to share it with the
Oh,
world.
wow.
And
Wow.
that is a surprise because vulnerability is such a fragile is so fragile and something that I have such a responsibility to take care of on their behalf.
Wow. You're right. It is. And they really entrusted you. That says a lot. That says a lot
Mhm.
about you, the person, your character, that they entrusted you, because in society, in a world that we live in now, people put up guards and shields and armor
Yeah.
to protect these little things, because all it takes is one little thing to come out the wrong way, and a sound bite that goes the wrong way, and
Hmm.
all of a sudden the whole message is turned the wrong way.
Right. Right.
But here it is, you just published a book, not just any book, you with a major publishing imprint that says a lot. So
Thank you.
congratulations.
Thank
Ladies and
you.
gentlemen, we've been talking to Chloe Dulce Louvouezo, who has a new book. Okay, let's show the book again. Life, I Swear, which is available today on blackbookstore.com.
Yes.
It is a healthy conversation with sisters who put down their shield, their
Mhm.
superpower shields, to show their vulnerability and kind of talk about their past. And hopefully there's some nuggets in there that'll help you through your life's journey. Uh, Please share with everyone your social media and how to keep in contact with you, Chloe.
Yeah, sure. My social media on Instagram is Chloe underscore Dulce, Dulce. I also have a website where all of my events are listed, and that is Chloe Louvouezo, .com.
Awesome. Thank you, Chloe, for a great conversation.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Much success for your book. Continue writing. Allow your creativity to flow
Thank
and put it
you.
on paper, archive it, leave a legacy for your children and your children's children, so they can be proud of what you've done and for your family. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of rolling out
Yeah.
Meet the Author.
Thank you. You've been such a pleasure.
Awesome.
I've enjoyed this.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
All right.